Today we are going to talk tips on making a bunting. So if you've been in our shop, when you walk up our stairs where all of our patterns are, there is a bunting that I made before we even opened the shop. Before we had a sign for the front window, I made a bunting that says 5 little monkeys quilting on it, and it hung in the front window until we had a proper sign to put up. People ask me all the time how to make it. So I thought, well, I don't really have a pattern, I just made it. So I'm going to show you how to make a bunting, but I thought that was kind of boring. So as a bonus to this, I'm also going to give you some tips on working with fussy fabric. In your kit to make this bunting, you are going to get like 3/4 of a yard of this weird gold lame. I love this fabric. I use this for embroidery all the time, for applique or freestanding lace, or like this thing right here. This is a freestanding flower, and then see all the shiny bits in there? Some of that is this. So there's lots of fun things to do with this fabric. So I thought today I would teach you some tricks on working with not cotton. We're going to talk about applique, we're going to talk about printing letters, fusing letters, stitching down letters, making triangles, sewing bunting together. There's going to be lots of different tips to do lots of things in this video, and as a bonus, we get to play with lame. Okay, so let's talk about prepping this lame. What I'm using is Dreamweave Fusible, which is actually an embroidery product by Floriani. What this was designed to do is, if you want to stitch on, say, silk, or you want to stitch on this type of product, you can fuse this to the back of it. It's really soft and silky and lightweight. You can see how sheer it is. Since I want to make this lame more structured, I think this is the right product for it. A couple of tips when you're working with this stuff though. You don't want the iron to touch the fusible. With this particular lame, I've already played with this a lot, so I know that I can iron it from the gold side. You don't want the iron to be too hot because it'll make the fusible creep. But I keep it, the iron that I use in most of my videos only has 2 settings. It has a regular setting and a high setting. If I do this on the regular setting, it works just fine. If you're going to fuse this from the fusible side, from the stabilizer side, make sure that the bumpy side of your stabilizer is against your fabric, and you want to use a pressing cloth. You can put this down between the iron and the interfacing, or the stabilizer. This will stop the stabilizer from creeping on you. You can use a little bit hotter iron if you find that your iron isn't hot enough to make it stick, but if you do that, make sure you use a pressing cloth. See, I've got this really stuck on here, and now it's not stretchy. It's kind of locked on there. Once you get it to this state where this is stuck down, you can press it some more from the gold side. What I'm going to show you how to do is cut triangles. So look at how nice and straight edged. See how this is fraying before it's cut? I cut these a couple days ago, and the edges are all nice and clean and easy to sew on. And since they don't wiggle and flop anymore, you know, they're nice and stabilized, we'll be able to sew on this without any problem. Okay, so I'm going to show you how to do this, and then I'm also going to show you how to make some fun gold letters out of the stuff that we have now prepped. All right, so cutting out our bunting shapes, I'm going to use the triangle squared ruler by Karen Montgomery, because it's not an equilateral triangle. Because I want my triangles to be longer than wide, that's why I chose this ruler. So this ruler is 9.5 inches tall, and that's the size that we're going to cut. We're going to cut them as big as the ruler. And I thought the white fabric showed up a little bit better to see the ruler. What I put in your kit was I put the gold fabric, but I also put the backing triangle to be the white because it makes the gold stand out a little bit better. See, when I put the gold against the purple, it gets darker, but when I put it against the white, it gets brighter. That's why I chose a white fabric for your backing. So we're going to cut, since this is a 9.5-inch ruler, we're going to cut 9.5-inch strips. And then we're going to use our ruler to flip and cut and flip and cut. And each strip you should be able to get 7 triangles from. I'm making a bunting that says Happy New Year because I thought that would be fun. And this is your bonus fabric. So what I've got is I've cut some triangles out of my black and some triangles out of my gold. I'm gonna mix and match. So like on my gold, I'm gonna do the black fabric, and on my black, I'm gonna do the gold fabric. You can mix and match these any way that you want to. Okay. If you want to mix white triangles in there, go for it. It's your party. You do what you want. So I've showed you in a couple of videos already how to use the applique tape. This stuff comes in a roll. It comes as tape and it comes as sheets. What I like about the sheets is you can run these right through your printer. So when you buy these kits on the 12 days, I will give you a PDF format of the words Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, and Happy Everything. You can do what you want with those individual words. They will print out on paper like this. You'll notice that some of the letters are backward. You'll see why that'll only work. It'll only work backward because we're going to put this on the back of the fabric and flip it over and then applique it. Hot tip for printing with this stuff. If you have a laser printer with a feeder, feed whichever way is the upside on your printer. On my printer, the paper side, so there's a fusible side and then there's like a waxy paper side. The waxy paper side is the side you need to print on. So on my printer, I put the waxy paper side up in my document feeder. So if I put this through the feeder, maybe you didn't know this, I just learned this myself. On the back side of your printer, so if your paper's feeding through this way, on the back side of your printer, there's a little door you can open. Feed this through your feeder, open the door in the back, and let it feed through the back. When the papers go through the feeders, there's lots of heat in there and it'll get stuck. And since you've got this fusible stuff in there, you don't want this fusible stuff stuck in your iron or in your printer. So open that back door and then your piece of paper will feed right through the back. Okay. That's my first tip. Next, when we're getting ready to work with this stuff, I like to cut away any extra material that there is. Because most of it's straight, I can just use my ruler and my rotary cutter and line it up with the straight lines that are on the letter and just cut it. My next little tool that I really like, it's called a slice tool. It's like an X-Acto knife, but the blade is ceramic. So one, it's harder to cut yourself with it. Not impossible, but harder to cut yourself with it. And you get a really nice clean cut. So I like this for when I'm cutting buttonholes or I need to trim out paper, things like this. Because you still have to kind of push through it really pretty good. But after we fuse this onto fabric, I'll show you how this works. I'm going to take my letter E, and on the back side of whatever fabric I'm going to fuse it to, I'm going to stick it on. I have rough cut out all my letters. I'm going to do these ones on the black. You want your iron to be hot, you know, not crazy hot, but I do turn this up to my higher setting. One of the feedbacks that I hear about apple stick is that it doesn't stick, but it does. You just have to be a little bit patient with it. So if it doesn't stick down the very first time you touch the iron to it, don't fret, it will. I've already stuck down most of my gold letters, but I saved this one so we could talk about tips with this. We're still going to, even though we have this fusible stabilizer on the back of this, we're still going to stick our apple stick to the back side. And just like we did with the black, we're going to fuse it down. And honestly, this fuses a little bit faster than the cotton does, I think because of the makeup of it. So I get it stuck on there until it's stuck, and then I flip it to the other side and I press it again. My hands are shaky, and so I don't get as good of a cut if I use my scissors than if I use my rotary cutter. So I've got a tip to show you about cutting this out. Any parts that I can cut out with my rotary cutter, I'm going to. Okay. Now this slice tool, at the end of the video, I'll show you what the new one looks like. They just sort of changed the way it looks. I'm not sure why, because I thought this looked really sort of alien and fun. Talked about this a second ago. It's a ceramic blade, so you're less likely to cut yourself with it. I'm not saying you should, you know, try to take your fingerprints off, but if you did this with an X-Acto knife, you'd be bleeding already. So it's a little bit safer. When you're using this, do you see the angle of the blade? Make sure that you're facing that angle down towards you, okay? You want to push pretty hard through this because you're trying to get through paper, fusible, stabilizer, and fabric. So I will usually cut my line and then make sure that I'm going through everything. I can usually get a more consistent cut with this tool than I can with scissors. And since it's kind of a precision cut, you're less likely to have frayed bits. So like there's something in here that's not separating, so I'm just going to keep going through this spot until whatever it is separates in there. Okay, and we're just going to cut out all of our letters this way. Again, I'm going to do as much as I can with my rotary cutter just because my rotary cutter is a lot more precise and so now I've made all my letters and I've made all my triangles. We want to center these the best we can. So I thought if I used things that were exactly the same in opposite colors, it'd be easier to follow. I find it easier to, especially when you're working with triangles, to just fold it in half and press it to find your middle. Because if you did measurements and tried to find the middle measurement on your ruler, there's 1/8 inches involved and 3/8, and it's just a hassle. If you fold it in half and press it though, you just want enough of a press that you can see it. Remember that when you're ironing on this gold stuff, you don't want to like heat it up a lot because it'll creep on you. So I pressed a crease in my middle, and then I'm going to just take a regular ruler, and this color friction highlighter shows up really good on this gold fabric. I'm going to mark a line 1 inch down from the top on all of my triangles, because what I'm trying to find here is keeping the letters the same distance from the top on all of them and centering them in the middle. So on the gold, I've used my pink highlighter, and on the black, I'm going to use this white erasable marking pen. A couple of tips when you're working with this. I have people tell me all the time, well, it doesn't show up. The biggest thing to remember when you're working with this pen is the ink doesn't show up until it dries. So if you mark a line and then you look at it, you can't see it. But if you wait a second, watch as the ink dries, the line shows up. See that? So when you mark with this pen, you just have to wait a second and then it shows up really nicely. It also comes away really nicely. So we've got our triangles ready to put our letters on. Here's a big tip when you're working with Applique. I love this stuff because the paper is really waxy, so it's easy to pull it off. But if you try to pull this off like a sticker and you start picking away at the corner, it'll fray the edges. So it's kind of like how when you buy stickers now, there's that break in the back. So you bend the sticker and you pull the paper off. You want to do the same thing with this stuff. So I just take a regular sewing pin and I score it down the middle. And when you bend it back like this, it actually breaks the paper and the paper comes off really easy that way. If you try to break it out from the corner or scratch away from the corner, it's going to fray it. So now it's like a sticker. Look at how sticky it is. So I'm going to center down my folded crease, center my letter down my folded crease, and line the top of my letter up with that white mark. And then I'm just going to stick it down and stick it in place. You can stitch it right now. It's stuck down enough to stitch it right now, but I want to get rid of that crease. So now when we press this, that middle crease is going to go away and that white pen mark we made goes away. Okay. So our Y is set down here, and then we're going to go to the machine and we're going to stitch this. So I've used 3 different stitches in my applique on this. I'm just going to show you 3 options. Again, you probably don't even have to stitch this down if you don't want to, because it's just decorative. You're probably not going to wash it. I put an off-white sort of champagne colored embroidery thread in my top, and then I've got a regular cotton sewing thread in the bottom. You can just straight stitch raw edge around this. I like that. I like that technique because I like when the threads fray a little bit because it looks handmade. So if you're going to raw edge stitch, what I've got is my J foot. We've talked about this foot a lot. It's the foot with the crack in the middle. And I like that line right there because I can line it up with the edge of whatever I'm stitching. So if I'm going to use this foot, I can bump my needle over to the left or to the right of that line based on where I'm going to sew. So since I turn right better than I turn left, I'm going to bump my needle over to the right a 1/2 millimeter, drop my foot, and then line that line up in the middle of my foot on the very edge of my applique. And then I can just kind of really slowly stitch around that curve and keep it consistently 1/2 millimeter inside my letter. Okay, so it kind of gives you that Letterman look, you know, because now, and I'll trim that thread off, but now I just have a nice straight stitch around it. You can also zigzag stitch. So I always think that the zig is the left side and the zag is the right side. So if you get to a corner, so we're just gonna stitch to this first curve here. And if you try to stop on the outside of your zigzag and then turn, it keeps things looking a little bit cleaner and it's easier for you to line it up. So there's what my zigzag stitch looks like on my letter. Now, when I'm actually doing applique, almost every time I use a quilter's applique stitch. I'm going to tack it down, and then what this stitch does is it takes 4 tiny little stitches and then it hops in and back out. So a couple of tips when you're using this as an applique stitch. See how it does the 4 tiny little stitches? I try to keep those 4 tiny little stitches right in the ditch. When I get to where I'm going to turn the corner, I try to make sure that it's one of the small stitches that's in that corner. If you have a hop-in stitch like I just had, make sure that you hop in and out before you turn the corner. Here is what the applique stitch looks like on there. I really like that one because I think it gives it just a little bit of a festive look. Okay, so I've got my 2 Wise Applique. I've got my white on white fabric cut in the same size triangle. I'm going to match up the bottom parts down here on both of them. The point of this video was to show you how to work with fussier fabrics. You'll see that kind of as we've worked with this and messed with it and folded it and whatever, it's gotten a little weird at the top. That's okay, because part of the reason I had you mark your lines at the top was for this movement. We're going to put our white on white fabric and our triangles right sides together, and I'm just going to pin them like here and here and here. We're going to go to our sewing machine. I have put cotton thread on and my 1/4 inch piecing foot. So what I like to do is I'm going to pin here and here and here, and then I'm going to sew down this side, pivot at the bottom, and go back up. And that's it. We just sew the 2 longer sides and leave the top open. So matching our blunted ends, most of them are going to lay out pretty square, but just in case, I kept one on purpose that I knew wasn't going to lay out too square, just to show you how to get around it. We're going to snip away the extra little bit at the tip of the blunted end. On this one where it was a little bit not straight on the side, the reason that's why we matched up the squared ends at the bottom, because these are raw, so we're going to trim all these down after we're done with the pressing. So we're going to trim the very bottom if it needs it. I'm going to use my hemostats to turn this right way out. So if I take my turning tool and poke this point out, we get that all really nice and as sharp as we can, and then run the turning tool up the side to poke those corners out. Then we're going to press this really well so that the edges are all nice and straight. So I'm going to go and press these 2, and then we're going to trim this one up. So remember at the beginning when we marked that 1 inch pink line? Well, now you can take your ruler and line it right up with the edge of where your letter is, and then if there's any sort of distortion at the top, just trim it away. So now we're going to spell out our Happy New Year. We're going to make our string for the top. Your kit has enough fabric in it to make like 120 inches worth of this stuff. So I cut a 2 inch strip. I'm going to use my 1 inch bias tape maker. Okay, so here's my favorite tips for working with this. I'm going to cut this at an angle. The angle doesn't really matter because you're going to cut it off, but what that does is it lets you feed this through easier. That little pointed tip is easier to feed through, and I do this at the ironing board. But on the back of this one, so if you put the fabric through and it doesn't come out the end, on the back there's a little opening that you can use a pin and slide it through. Okay, so I have put 3 strips of this together. I've pressed it with my 1 inch tape maker, and I have flattered it. So it's nice and flat, and it's 1 inch wide. So I have 120, roughly 120-ish inches of this. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 letters that are roughly 9 inches wide. Okay, so you can lay these out however you want. If you want to spread your words out more, you can add, you have enough fabric to make 4 of these strips. I was wrong. You have enough to make 4 strips, so up to roughly 165 inches worth of tape. So you decide where you want to lay your letters out, if you want them to touch, if you want to have space between, if you want to add fringe or something to it. You can do whatever you like with how you're going to lay this out. The space that I want to put this, I don't have a lot of room for extra sides on it, so I'm going to put mine pretty close to the end. We're going to do the year part. So here is my year word. Okay, I am using 1/2 inch Stitch Perfection tape by R&K. I like this stuff because you don't have to put it on with the iron, which means I don't have to do this on my ironing board. It's just a double stick tape. So since this is 1 inch, I'm using a 1/2 inch tape because I really just want to position my letters. I don't feel like for this application I need to fuse it down, because if it wiggles a little bit, it's not a big deal, and you can see where everything's going to line up at. Okay, so I'm just going to put enough to do year on my tape here. And you don't have to make the tape bias if you don't want to, because we're not going around curves or anything. We're stitching straight lines. We don't need to make this harder on ourselves than it has to be. And this, like I said, this doesn't set with an iron. I'm just pressing this down with my hand. I'm just going to pull back enough that I can put my R in here, and I'm going to line it up with the top of the tape, because then I know that I have it about a 1/2 inch down. So actually I'm going to do it just a little bit lower than that, so that when I fold this, there's room for the top part of my triangle. Okay, so I can fold this down now and match this up with the tape over here. Okay, you can pin this if you want to. A couple of pins might keep things straighter. You can put this tape on both sides. If you would prefer to put the tape on the other side and fold it down and keep it there, that is totally up to you as well. So I'm going to pull this back, and I'm going to lay out my whole word year. And like I said, the space I want to put this is in my front window, and I don't have a huge space, so I'm not going to put gaps between my letters, but you can if you want to make your bunting longer. I'm going to take this side here, and you do have some sticky parts showing, so if you want to use that as kind of your guideline, you can. So I'm going to stick these down. I am going to put a few pins in here just because I don't necessarily trust myself to go from the table to my machine without wiggling that away. But since you can kind of line up where the edges of these are, because you can see them in between, you don't have to worry about going from here to your machine and your letters falling out. So I've put a black thread in my top and in my bobbin. I've got this lined up like I had it on the table. I'm using my 1/4 inch piecing foot, but I'm using it a little different than I normally do. Normally when I use my 1/4 inch piecing foot, I'm using this little guide over here. I'm actually using this part of my foot, this space that's between the gap and the needle, and I'm lining that up with the edge of my tape. Now I can run my finger on here and I can feel the ledge of where the back of this is. So I can line that up, and then when I stitch along the edge, everything's going to catch. And since I'm not stitching right on the very edge of this, it's making a different design element. Okay, so when I get to the gap here, I can see where this opens up, and I can tape those together. And then by using the inside edge of my 1/4 inch foot, I'm kind of getting like a not quite an 1/8 of an inch, a little bit more than an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And I'm just going to stitch all the way across what I have set into my machine. So our bunting's finished. I don't really have a way to lay it out so you can see it all at once, but here's our happy, here's our new, and there's our year. So the fabric that I picked for the sort of string at the top, I thought was really kind of fun and festive. But see, I stitched it with the black thread, so the black thread kind of disappears in there. And it stitched both sides, and everything's all nice and tight and in there. If you use all 4 strips, you've got plenty to hang this, and you've got an end that you can hang it with too. I usually just tie a knot in the end of this because it lets me hook it onto something. You can do it however you like. You can let them hang down or whatever you want to do with it. If you would rather do a more Christmassy themed project. So I did Happy New Year, but we also have a holiday themed bundle. So it would be all the same steps and processes, but these are the colors of fabric that I chose. This is what the gold metallic fabric looks like on there. I thought it was really fun because you have this really festive, but still modern looking fabric, and the gold fabric looks really cool on it. Again, you're going to have the white fabric in here too, and that's what's going to go behind here. So the gold is going to pop out on there. So this is Figo fabric, and we have the green ornaments, the red ornaments, and then this really cool sort of olivey green with gold accents on it. So this is going to be the holiday kit. I think you guys are going to have fun with this. Once you learn the technique and you do the things, you could make birthday banners or homecoming banners or whatever you like to make. So I think you're going to like this one. See you tomorrow.